recording and get rid of my screen share and pass you over to Andy to introduce the speakers for tonight.
Okay, thanks very much, Hannah. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by thanking Hannah, who certainly does much more than just tech support. Hannah actually makes all this work and yeah, does all the organising. So thank you, Hannah, for getting us to this point today. And yeah, I'm going to set the scene and then introduce tonight's speakers. And yeah, it's great to see you all. And we're having a lot of events in November, and I see a few of you here that have been on quite a few events. So we've got some great stamina for online sessions. A really packed November. Okay, so to seed sovereignty. So seed sovereignty is the right of farmers and communities to save, exchange, and manage their seeds freely, ensuring access to locally adapted, culturally important, and genetically diverse varieties. The concept is fundamental to food sovereignty and food security, and especially important as industrial agriculture increasingly relies on and promotes, often through very heavy-handed measures, patented and genetically modified or hybrid seeds. These corporate controlled seeds are often unsuitable for local conditions and limit farmers' ability to adapt their crops naturally to changes in the climate or soil. So seed sovereignty supports resilience and sustainability by allowing and supporting communities to cultivate seeds that thrive within their own unique ecosystems. I guess what I really want to say is that seed sovereignty is deeply interwoven with the principles of permaculture, which emphasizes ecological design, local adaptation, and sustainability. Permaculture's ecological approach encourages the development of closed-loop systems that rely on natural processes and resources. By supporting farmers and growers to cultivate and exchange their own seeds, seed sovereignty fosters biodiversity, which is a really essential element of permaculture, or biodiversity and also agrobiodiversity. A diverse selection of locally adapted seeds contributes to soil health, pest resistance, and the overall balance of the food system, which of course are all kind of core elements, goals of permaculture systems. So achieving seed sovereignty would allow permaculture practitioners to embody their commitment to designing and creating regenerative and self-sustaining ecosystems. By protecting the right to save and share seeds, we help ensure resilience of food systems, preserve agricultural biodiversity, and empower our communities to sustain themselves and be more self-reliant and prepared for, changing climate, and also to stand in solidarity with other communities around the world. So basically, it really is super important to our work, which is why, one reason why I'm really pleased tonight to be able to introduce these two great speakers to help us explore this topic in much more depth. We're especially grateful to them because Sinead Fortune, who wanted to come along, who's also from the Gaia Foundation, had to drop out. So Katie and Holly have really helped us to keep this going. Katie Hastings is the Wales coordinator for the Gaia Foundation Seed Sovereignty Programme. As part of her role, she works with a diverse range of growers and farmers to support a genetically diverse seed system. Katie supports the seed selling cooperative, the Wales Seed Hub, that we heard from earlier in the series, and facilitates the Llafwrni Farmer Network, who are working to revive rare oats. Holly Sylvester works part-time for the Seed Sovereignty Programme as Future Resilience Seed Coordinator, facilitating the programme's crowd breeding project and inspiring others to explore the radical possibilities of seeds. Alongside this work, she is also a commercial vegetable and seed grower and has worked at Trill Farm Garden and Oxton Organics. In 2024, Holly travelled the Pacific Northwest of US and Canada on a Churchill Fellowship, exploring collaborative and dynamic approaches to seed production that build resilience and diversity. Before embarking on her journey into agroecological farming, Holly trained in formal horticulture and has a background in urban community growing. So two really experienced seed savers and seed sovereignty experts who can help us through this session tonight. So yeah, I'm going to pass over to, I think, Katie first, who's going to take us through this evening. Thank you.
I'm just sharing my screen. So just give me a minute. And can you see that? Ooh.
We can see that, yeah.
Yeah, and can we spotlight Katie?
So yeah, so Holly's going to start actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm going to share the screen and start. Yeah.
Are you on the first slide, Katie? Yeah, grand. Thank you, Andy. That was an amazing introduction. Yeah, really looking forward to this evening. Thank you for inviting us to join. Katie is in control of the presentation, so I'm going to have to ask her to move slides for me. So please excuse me when I have to break in between each slide. But Katie, please could you move on to the next slide? So why are we here this evening? Why are we here? Seeds. We can all be seed savers. It's really, really old knowledge, as Andy has already talked about. Seeds and humans have co-evolved since the beginning of our existence. We worked with plants, we developed them from wild populations, bringing them into cultivation, and we formed this reciprocal relationship with plants that's been beneficial to all involved. And somewhere along the line, though, it feels like we've forgotten that. And the impact of that we're only really now fully realizing, because seed is at the heart of our food system, and it's the thing that is often the least considered and often taken for granted. Next slide, please, Katie. Oh, I think it's the next one, actually. Sorry, I think I've got a bit of a delay. It's the second. Thank you. So we've lost something like 75% of genetic diversity in our crops over the last century. And I'm sure many of you here are going to be familiar with the reasons why. It's globalization of our food system, it's industrialization of agriculture since the Green Revolution, but it's also modern plant breeding methods and a lot of plant variety legislation, particularly that we have here in the UK. And I'm just going to ask Katie to skip to the next slide, please. Now, this slide might be familiar for some of you. It's an image that's often used, but it shows the consolidation of our seed industry. I'm not sure if you can see, but it's just 4 corporations that now own over 60% of the world's germplasm. Now, we've got ourselves into a bit of a situation where seed has become a commodity, and farmers and gardeners and growers have a serious lack of power and agency when it comes to the seed and the varieties they grow. Next slide, please, Katie. And most investment in plant breeding over recent decades, as Andy mentioned earlier, has been on producing F1 hybrids. Now, at the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we're all about open pollinated seed. Personally, I think that hybrids are important because hybridization is the foundation of plant breeding, and hybrids can also offer reliability and uniformity for growers. But the problem is they contribute to the commodification of seed. If these are held locally within locally traded systems, it's less of a problem. But at the moment, as we've seen in the last slide, a few large corporations hold the monopoly on our seed system. Now, F1 hybrids, as many of you probably know, are only genetically stable for 1 generation, which means if you want to save and continue to grow that variety, you need to return to the plant breeder or seed company to repurchase that seed every year. You can't save seed from them. If we really want true seed sovereignty, then we need quality, open pollinated varieties that do well in our organic systems and allow growers to save seed from them year after year. Next slide, please, Katie. Now, on top of all this, we also currently import something like 80% of the seed of our seed into the UK. Now, that's kind of shocking, because what happens when the seed that we order doesn't arrive in the post? Now, this was really obvious during the pandemic, and it's actually become more and more of a problem since Brexit, because we haven't got the connections with European seed producers that we used to have. It's not as easy to import that seed. Next slide, please, Katie. Now, I'm very conscious of, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but what I'm trying to hammer home at the start of our talk today is that seed really matters. It's at the heart of our food system. And although it feels like oftentimes today there's a lot of focus on soil health, on wider ecosystem health, on ecological and nature-friendly farming and gardening practices, those conversations very rarely include seed. Many of us just accept it as another input, a commodity. But where is this locally resilient seed going to come from if it's not going to come from us? Next slide, please, Katie. So before I go on, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how amazing seed is. A tiny seed contains all that is needed to grow into a full-blown plant that will feed and nourish us and our communities, and also the many thousands of other living beings it encounters in its life cycle. A plant, if allowed to set seed, will set seed with many hundreds, if not thousands of seed to ensure the continuation of its genetics. Plants are inherently abundant. They just want to give. Now, if any of you have ever let a brassica crop go to seed, then you're going to be very familiar with how much seed you're going to end up with. You're going to have far more than you could ever need. And this very nature of seed saving encourages you to share. It's really, really hard to be selfish when you're a seed saver. And in that way, seeds have the power to build community because they're asking to be shared and they're asking to be swapped and traded. Next slide, please. Now, seeds also have the canny trick of adapting to local conditions because they form really important relationships with the microbial life in the soil. They actually have microbiomes just like ours, and these are passed on through the seed. So if you're saving your seed year on year, you may find that your plants grow better, that they germinate faster, they become more vigorous, and they'll produce bigger yields. And this makes them more resilient because seed saving is like saving a memory of that year and the many years before it. And in our current climate chaos, the current situation we're in, think how valuable it could be to have plants that remember drought or that cold, wet spring or that very early frost. Seed saving brings resilience. Plants have a lot to teach us. So what action can we take? Katie?
Yeah, so me and Holly talked about this beforehand, and we were like, we can't do a talk about seed sovereignty without starting on a kind of negative. So as Holly was like outlining earlier, you know, corporate control of the seed system and that horrifying fact on one of the slides that, you know, we've lost 75% of our crop diversity in the last 100 years. But then Holly's just nicely segued us into like a positive, you know, yeah, seeds are really important. They're really powerful. So what action can we take? So I'm going to say something about personal action that we can take. I'm going to say something about national action that we can take. And then I'm also going to say something about how that links to kind of the global seed sovereignty movement. And Holly's going to join me on that bit as well. So going back to kind of basics, and I'm sure as permaculturalists, like you're all familiar with these things, but when you let a plant go to seed, like complete its life cycle in your garden, there's loads of benefits to that. So this is like the personal level stuff in your growing space or your garden. When we let plants flower and go to seed, they're great for pollinators, they're providing food for birds. And they're also like, obviously we're saving seed to go on to the next generation, which Holly just mentioned, like the importance of that, of those seeds adapting to our conditions. And we're deepening our connection to plants. Like it is really magical to see, like as a vegetable grower for many years, you know, you were always harvesting these plants like halfway through their life cycle, or, you know, you're never really letting a lot of these food crops complete their life cycle. And when I started seed saving, I suddenly like saw this whole other side to some of these crops. It was like, wow, parsnips, they grow huge and they flower and they look completely different to what they do when they're food crops, you know. So really deepening like my connection with those plants by saving seed and kind of understanding, yeah, the full life cycles of the plants. So these are just like things that you can personally benefit from when you are growing seed in your growing space or your garden. But I want to go further than that in kind of saying, well, also better quality. I wanted to mention better quality. So if you are going to grow seed and save seed yourself for the following season, you're going to get better quality seed because it's going to be fresher than seed that's been sat on a shelf for several years. And then, like Holly said, it's also going to become adapted to your growing conditions. So every year that you save seed in your garden or your growing space, it's going to become adapted to your soils and your conditions. So you're going to basically be getting better food crops as well by saving seed. So yeah, all personal benefits. And so you're kind of building the resilience of your growing space by saving seed. But then also, like Holly said, there's the community benefit of saving seed. So like in terms of people care, like Holly mentioned, abundance of of seeds. And it's true, you can't, like Holly said, you can't just keep the seeds to yourself. They're designed to be shared. So there's that whole people care, like community element to seed saving, that you just can't help but share seeds that you have saved with fellow growers, and that connects us to one another. And then also Holly mentioned this statistic of like 80% of seed is imported, organic seed in the UK. So by saving your own seed, you are actually really contributing to our kind of seed resilience in this country, because it's less seed imported and it's more seed grown here in our different regions in the UK. And you're also, by growing seed in your growing space, saving seed in your growing space, you are contributing to this really important diversity that we're losing. So again, that 75% figure, like 75% of crop diversity lost in the last 100 years. So by saving seeds yourself, you are contributing to preserving this treasury of genetic diversity that's so important for our future. And yeah, I just want to, because we're talking about action, encourage you to look for kind of the unique and rare varieties and the varieties that are less commonly available, and save those for seed as a way of preserving those varieties. And you can go to places like the Heritage Seed Library, which I'm sure you're all really familiar with. You can become a member and you can take seeds from there, and you can put them back into the Heritage Seed Library afterwards. And you can also join like community seed banks and community seed libraries to kind of access more rare seeds, and you can contribute to growing those seeds and putting them back into those community resources to preserve this genetic diversity for all of us. And I also wanted to encourage you to kind of look for your local seed stories, because they're not always readily available. But if you speak to older growers or older farmers, or you ask around, you know, on the allotments or wherever, you might find these really unique local seed stories. And there are still quite a lot of seeds out there that are like essentially on the brink of extinction, a lot of varieties of food which not many people are growing anymore. And, you know, there could be some really unique to your area, which you might find a really interesting seed story, and you could be growing and saving that seed yourself and helping to preserve those varieties for the future for everybody. So that's kind of, yeah, personal benefits and personal actions in terms of your garden and saving seed. And then I'm going to move to talking more nationally, like how can we link with the national movement for seed sovereignty. And I just want to frame this by saying that, so the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we are part of the Gaia Foundation, which is a charity, and the Seed Sovereignty Programme has been running for 7 years. And before the Seed Sovereignty Programme began 7 years ago, the situation with seed sovereignty in the UK was actually quite dire. So not many people were talking about the importance of seed, not many people were talking about the concept of seed sovereignty, and although there were obviously pockets of people who really cared about seed diversity and seed sovereignty, it wasn't really in like the wider growing and farming conversation. And a lot of people in the UK, a lot of farmers and growers have for the last 100 years been losing the skills of seed production. So where seed production used to be part of the growing cycle, and you would grow your crops and you would save your seed from those crops, and then you would grow them again. And that was part of the natural farming and growing cycles. In the last 100 years, we've really lost that. And we've kind of moved towards importing a lot of seeds, buying seeds from further afield. And so the skills and the craft of seed saving, we've really been losing those over the last 100 years in the UK. So that's kind of the situation that the Seed Sovereignty Programme came into 7 years ago, was like, we really need to be boosting the skills in seed production, and we really need to be boosting the conversation around seed sovereignty. So I'm happy to say that, like, in the last 7 years, I think we have had a big impact, and the seed sovereignty movement has been really growing in the UK, and that's really exciting. So this slide kind of is an overview. Like, we do a lot of different things with the Seed Sovereignty Programme, and we put them under like 4 topics. So cultivate, connect, celebrate, catalyze. I'm not going to bore you with the fine details of every single thing that we do, but you can look on the Seed Sovereignty website, and we're happy to answer questions, tell you more about all of these things. But we do this whole range of different activities to try to like support the seed sovereignty movement, including like festivals and gathering seed growers with seed companies and providing training. So there's like so much activity that's happened with the Seed Sovereignty Programme over the last 7 years to kind of support this national movement for a more diverse and resilient seed system. This is about our education. So I said, like a lot of people started again, good, is we have been running training in seed production for growers all across the UK. So we do introductory courses, we do year-long courses that are more in depth. We also do continued learning for like professional growers. So we've really been like working on training a whole bunch of new seed producers in the UK. And yeah, the skills in seed production have really increased in the last 7 years in the UK, and that's amazing to see. We have also created films, and we've made films about beans in Northern England and community urban growing spaces in London. And doing is spring and starting, but I don't know if you want me to wait for it to start again or.
I think just to say, I think Hannah's internet has become unstable, so we'll switch it to me, and then it should be okay. You carry on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so you can watch our films, and a big thing that we are doing in the Seed Sovereignty Programme is trying to tell stories about these really unique, interesting seeds around the UK that people are working to kind of preserve and share, so you can watch those stories. We also do celebration events, so like working in different regions to kind of get growers and farmers together to really celebrate like the work they're doing with seeds, to connect with one another and to share seeds, which is obviously really important if we're building a seed sovereignty movement. We run a seed gathering, so we've done that twice online, like a conference online specifically focused on seed sovereignty and seed production and discussions around seed ownership. And we're going to do another one in 2025, so watch out for that, and hopefully that's going to be in person. So that's another way that we're trying to like build these connections between seed producers in the UK and people who care about seed sovereignty, to really build a movement around this concept of. We also do celebration events, so like working in different regions to kind of get growers and farmers together to really celebrate like the work they're doing with seeds, to connect with one another and to share seeds, which is obviously really important if we're building a seed sovereignty movement. We run a seed gathering, so we've done that twice online, like a conference online specifically focused on seed sovereignty and seed production and discussions around seed ownership. And we're going to do another one in 2025, so watch out for that, and hopefully that's going to be in person. So that's another way that we're trying to like build these connections between seed producers in the UK and people who care about seed sovereignty, to really build a movement around this concept of seed sovereignty. We also do advocacy and legislation work. I'm rushing through everything here, and I can tell you more about this in detail later if you want, but I'm just giving you a kind of overview of the sorts of things that are happening nationally. At the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we've worked on 3 kind of main advocacy things, and one is we work with a seed lawyer called Fulia Batia, who's a European seed lawyer, and we've been working with her to provide some training on navigating seed legislation as commercial growers or community growers, how to navigate the legislation around sharing and selling seeds, and also so that growers can better join the conversation about how to change the legislation so it's more suited to support a diverse seed system. We've co-created an advocacy paper with the UK Grain Lab, which is about being able to sell and share heterogeneous cereals. So that's like cereals that are not uniform, they're kind of genetically diverse, and being allowed to kind of share those cereals and having like legislation that allows that to happen. And then we've also been facilitating a small packet independent seed forum is what it's called, and it's like small seed companies who work growing agroecological seed. It's open pollinated seed, and it's a forum for them to talk to each other, support one another, and also talk about legislation and policy and how that needs to change to support small scale seed producers in the UK. So this is like an overview. These are things we're doing, these are things you can get involved in if you're interested. And I also just wanted to say we also do very much work with grassroots groups. So I'm the Wales coordinator for the Seed Sovereignty Programme, and two groups that I've worked very closely with over my time in this job is the Wales Seed Hub, who you've heard from before, which is a cooperative of seed sellers who've all done our training, and then we've worked together to set up a seed selling cooperative. So we've worked alongside them to set up something really tangible and real, which is a place where you can buy seed that's grown in Wales directly from those growers. And then also on the other side here is the Llafenni network, which is the group of farmers that I work with in Wales who are working to revive rare and almost extinct oats. So hopefully you've heard of the story of the black oats. We've had a lot of attention for the story of the black oats. And so I've been working with this group of farmers, some of them older, some of them younger, to work together to share these seeds and to save them and to increase their quantities and to learn more about them. So that's just kind of a shout out, that's just in my region, but across the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we do work grassroots, on the ground as well, supporting growers and farmers to grow diverse seeds. I'm not just going to talk facts at you, but these are some of the things that just kind of show you how we're moving in the right direction with a national kind of seed sovereignty movement. In the last 4 years, this is some of the figures from the Seed Sovereignty Programme. We have trained, we've got 105 new growers producing new varieties. So that's 322 new veg varieties and 18 new grain varieties, which they weren't previously producing. So that's an increase in diversity. Or another nice fact is the 1,497 growers who've been trained through our program in that 4-year time period, just showing again the increase in skills in seed sovereignty. So yeah, I mean that sounds like a bit of a plug for the Seed Sovereignty Programme, but we are working nationally, and so this gives you a picture of what's happening nationally. And the way that we work is we do work grassroots, so we work with the people on the ground who want to do this stuff, and we work to connect them and amplify what they're doing. So I think our work does show a kind of what is happening nationally with seed sovereignty in the UK. But, and I think this is where I segue back to Holly, it's great to talk about the UK, but the movement for seed sovereignty needs to be global. It's not, we don't want to just work within our borders. And there's a huge movement for seed sovereignty across the whole globe, who we can learn a lot from and be inspired by and be part of something bigger. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the global seed sovereignty movement as well.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I just wanted to share a few anecdotes from my trip. As I mentioned at the start, I went on a Churchill Fellowship this summer, and I was away for 4 months in the Pacific Northwest of the US and Canada. And there's a real thriving seed movement there. And yeah, I think it's really important that as seed savers, we just recognize that we're part of a whole global movement, as Katie says, and it's incredible to have access to and to connect with other people that have similar passions and working really hard to build this movement of seed savers across the world. So I spent, as I said, 4 months in this community, and I was exposed to just this rich community that had embraced the power of collaboration and seed saving. And I just wanted to spotlight a couple of people that I met on my travels. And one of those was Lane Selman. Now, Lane is the founder of the Culinary Breeding Network, whose mission is to foster connection and collaboration across the whole food industry. So Lane works to kind of bridge the gap between plant breeders, seed growers, farmers, chefs, and just people that go and buy their vegetable from the supermarket or the local farmers market. And she really, really works hard to bring people together through various kind of participatory breeding projects and also incredible celebratory events, which all have seed at the heart of them. Katie, do you mind just next slide, please? Now, one of these amazing events that I was really, really lucky to attend was the Variety Showcase. Now, Lane runs these every year, and they're just incredible, amazing events that bring all of those stakeholders that I just mentioned together. Now, she partners either plant breeders or university plant breeding departments or farmers that are stewarding and developing seed on farm with a chef. And that partnership works together over many months, oftentimes a year, to actually choose one of the varieties that the plant breeder or the farmer is stewarding and developing, and the chef will make something incredibly delicious out of that variety, and then they showcase that variety at these events to the general public. These events are open to the general public, as a ticketed thing, and you can go in and you can sample and try this amazing new variety that's been developed or is being showcased, and actually have conversations with the person that's made that dish, that's cooked it, and then also the person that's working behind the scenes to actually create that variety or steward that variety. So it encourages everyone to be really invested in where their food comes from, and it means that everybody is participating in all stages of the plant breeding process and getting a real feel for exactly where their food comes from. Next slide, please, Katie. Now, some other amazing folks that I met on my travels were the people at Farm Folk City Folk. Now, they're part of Seed Change and the Bouter Foundation and BC Seed Security Programme. Now, they support as many people as possible to participate in seed growing. It's very much like the work that we as a Seed Sovereignty Programme are doing here that Katie outlined earlier. They do things from farmer field days to mentorship programmes to citizen seed trials. They really have a diversity of approaches to maximise their impact and get people thinking about seed. Now, one of the fantastic things they do have is these mobile seed cleaning units. Now, these are incredible. They hook up to a truck, and there are 4 of these, and they get toured around the province of BC every autumn, and they visit everyone from seed companies through to people that are growing seed on contract, to community groups, to just people that are producing a lot of seed but don't necessarily have the means to invest in the equipment to really do a quality, thorough clean of their seed. Now, it just makes seed cleaning much more accessible to all of these people. And it also provides a chance for people to network and meet each other and share news across the region and bring those really important stories that Katie mentioned to others within their network. So it's really looking at the practical element of making equipment accessible to a wide range of people, because there's that unit is stacked full of incredible seed cleaning equipment, but it's also about building relationships. And these are a real talking point, because they just do a fantastic job of drawing people's attention. They go out to different community events. Members of the public are always asking what they're about. So they're stimulating interest and conversation about seed as well, and really offering an opportunity to showcase the benefits of locally grown seed. So they were just a couple of examples of some of the really interesting community and collaborative folks and movements that I met on my travels this summer. And I'm going to hand back to Katie. So that's just inside the seed cleaning trailer, a little glimpse inside.
Yeah, so I want to carry on this theme of like other inspiring projects around the globe that can inspire our movement here in the UK for better seed sovereignty. And I'm sure that most of you know of Dr. Vandana Shiva. She's a very famous seed activist who we are inspired by, and she runs the Navdanya project in North India. So they have like a community seed bank there. They work a lot with local farmers, mostly women, to preserve a lot of rare varieties in their community seed bank. But I also think what's really inspiring about Navdanya is they've seeded a whole bunch of community seed banks all over India. So I think it's like over 100 community seed banks across India, which the Navdanya project has supported to kind of start. And so, yeah, there's this whole movement in India, mostly led by female farmers, which is all about growing the varieties that farmers love on the ground, that are suited to small scale agriculture, suited to organic growing principles, and they are like building this alternative seed system themselves. So you can talk loads about like what's wrong with the corporate seed system, but like here's an example of kind of India-wide like really grassroots kind of seed system that's being built by the Navdanya project, which is really inspiring. And I also wanted to talk about how when we are talking about like reviving rare seeds, there's obviously really important reasons for doing that, like around, we've already mentioned them, like the importance of genetic diversity, the traits they might have, the way that they adapt to our soils. But seeds are obviously so much more than just seeds. Like they are like inextricably linked to communities and people, the people who've grown them and the people who've stewarded them over many years. So you can't really kind of revive a seed without connecting to that story of the people who've grown the seed before you and the people that you might pass the seed on to. And I think this I'm really inspired by the work of the Alliance of Seed Keepers in North America. So they work work with indigenous people and indigenous seeds, and yeah, native seeds is what they call them. So they're not just reviving the seeds themselves and sharing the seeds themselves, but they're talking about the stories and reviving the cultural practices around those seeds as well. And so what Rowan White, who's a key member of the Alliance of Native Seed Keepers, says is like, we're not just revitalizing seeds, we're revitalizing cultures. So by revitalizing our traditional seeds, we're, you know, getting back in touch with our practices and our rituals and our stories. And so seed revitalization goes hand in hand with cultural revitalization. And I think that's why it's so inspiring, because as we revive seeds, we revive our connections to communities and people. And I just love this quote from Rowan White, who is of the Alliance of Native Seed Keepers. And she says, "It turns out that not only do seeds have this incredible diversity, a prism of different colors and shapes and sizes and places where they grow best and communities they come from, but that they also carry stories and beautiful lineages of relation." So I kind of wanted to, yeah, remind us of that sharing of seed, how important that is for our relationships with each other, with the past, and with other communities. And then I guess our segue into the next bit with Holly is that we were going to bring it back to, again, like how you can get involved in this movement in the UK. Like, we can be inspired by all of this global stuff, but how can we get more involved in the seed sovereignty movement in the UK?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so at the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we teach traditional seed keeping practices, which oftentimes involve isolating varieties. So often they're people's varieties that maybe they've stewarded for a long time, or they're heirloom varieties or other open-pollinated varieties that, in order to keep genetically stable, they need to be isolated from other varieties of the same species. And that's generally what we teach. But once you have a grasp on that, then we also encourage you to maybe think about breaking the rules. So I've actually been facilitating a project that was inspired somewhat by some of these projects I mentioned in the US. And I've been working with a group of amazing growers and farmers from across the UK and Ireland for the past year on this crowd breeding project. And in the crowd breeding project, we're specifically looking at growing diverse populations, and it's a participatory breeding project. So we're not growing stable open pollinated varieties, we're actually throwing everything together and mixing it all up. And the reason for this is because of the many reasons that I mentioned right at the start of this talk, was our lack of genetic diversity that we now have, the fact that we're relying on importing lots of seed, we have a real lack of access to really high quality, good organic seed, and the diversity is just becoming less and less. And to also really encourage that farmer-led stewardship. And as Katie mentioned, in building new stories and creating new stories that really encourage intentional stewardship and people to weave these seeds back into our cultures and to our communities. And this, doing it through a participatory breeding project, means that it's very much centered on community and collaboration. And this project has been incredible because the group of farmers has just been so engaged, and the sense of community that's emerged out of this project, of everyone growing these diverse populations together over the last season, has just been super inspiring. And through these participatory breeding projects, it again goes back to what I mentioned about Lane in the US, about bridging those gaps and bringing plant breeding back into the hands of farmers and growers. Because rather than plant breeders being sat in universities or very separate from the people that are actually growing the crops, participatory projects return that power to the farmers and the gardeners, because it's farmer-led stewardship, and it's also collaborative, which means that the risk is shared and that the joy is also shared. And the reason, as I mentioned, we're focusing on diverse populations is because I believe that the subtle and slow regional adaptation that we get from a lot of open pollinated varieties isn't necessarily enough in our current world. And I think that we need to think a little bit more radically. Now, growing diverse populations is old knowledge. It's how many Indigenous communities have stewarded and grown their crops for centuries. And it involves growing crops as flocks. So you'll select multiple varieties of the same species and grow them together and allow them to cross-pollinate. Effectively, it's promiscuous pollination. it's not complete anarchy because you have to intentionally decide which varieties you want to mix. So ideally you're choosing varieties that have traits you want to have in your eventual population. And so there is some selection criteria, but the idea is that you're allowing this crossing of genetics. Genetics are allowed to roam more freely. And through that, we're creating more diversity, and this can bring resilience. Because if each plant isn't almost identical to its neighbor, then in those instances of drought or extreme wet, or the hot summer we might have, then some of the population, some of that crop might survive and give you a yield. And something that I think is also really important about this project is the joy that it brings, because there's something fundamentally joyous about working with these diverse populations. Next slide, please, Katie. We're so used to seeing monocultures and even just beds of almost identical plants that produce very similar fruit or yield. And these diverse populations, they're just really, really beautiful and tangible, and they encourage you to really engage with the crop, and they just bring a lot of joy. And as I mentioned, it's just been really inspirational seeing how excited and how much joy there's been in this group this year. Now, I think the reason I was really passionate about starting this project is because we need more of everything. And I do believe there is a place for everything. And I don't want to dismiss stable varieties, stable open pollinated varieties. I don't want to dismiss F1 hybrids, and especially the historical and cultural relevance of some of our heirloom cultivars. But I do feel that with what's going on in the world right now, it's not a time to rest on our laurels, and we really do need to explore all of our options in producing the resilient crops of our future. And that is it from me.
Yeah, we thought we'd open it up now rather than keep talking at you. If you have questions.
We've been talking a while.
We could do a flyby tour of global seed sovereignty and
Yeah.
everything. So maybe you have questions now. I don't know.
Yeah, let's go to that. So I'm going to bring us all onto the screen, and I'll even spotlight myself with my noticing sort of very garish colours. That was fantastic. You really covered a lot of ground there, and there's a few questions in the chat which we can get to, but I'm sure there are a lot more questions. So whilst we're starting with the first couple, this is a great opportunity for people to add more into the chat, and we'll get through quite a few. I think we've got a good chance to get through some great stuff here. So I wanted to kind of end on the stuff that you were doing. Start with the stuff that you finished with, Holly, which was about this. What did you call it? The flock?
It's the crowd breeding project.
Crowd breeding program,
Yeah.
but this idea of having all the different varieties. So someone put in the chat about YQ wheat. I was lucky enough to know Professor Martin Wolf, and walked through some of his fields of YQ wheat when he was kind of developing that. So I guess to some extent it's a similar approach. Do you have any update about YQ wheat, or how that's going?
So I mentioned very early on that we have some quite restrictive legislation in the UK, and it does mean that we can't legally market heterogeneous populations, which is essentially what the crowd breeding project is doing, and YQ wheat is one of those. And there is a project at the moment. It was run for 7 years, and it's been extended again for another 7 years on grains, and that's part YQ wheat is part of that. But the crowd breeding project, I'm focusing on vegetables.
Okay.
And because we're sharing it amongst us and it's a very fledgling project, it's okay. But actually to market and sell a diverse population at a scale is outside of current legislation. But the YQ wheat and the population wheat has been incredibly successful.
It has. I remember Martin saying how he gave some to a Hungarian grower, and they planted it, and they had some really extreme weather conditions like the year later, and they actually still had a really successful crop. And it's like the difference between GM and YQ is like the intelligence is in the crop.
I mean, yeah, we're essentially looking for technology to solve issues that plants can already solve for us, and also like healing that relationship between us and plants to be able to really fully embrace that plant to fulfill its role and be its like most amazing self. Basically, it's all there. We don't need this GM technology at all.
Yeah, so that's very exciting. So you're really encouraging people to sign up. What would people need to do if they? What would the practical implications be if they became part of the project?
A crowd breeding. So we're open to applicants at the moment. You do have to be a commercial grower or part of a community group,
Okay.
and you have to have been through a certain level of seed production or training. It's for people that have a level of experience in seed production, but there are links on I believe on our website, but also through the Gaia Foundation social media. And if you're on our newsletter, there's links to that on how to apply, and I can share further details with you as well after this.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so what to do next? There's quite a few questions. So one was from Chris Southall. Can you say more about how exactly the mycorrhiza is saved within the seed? That's a very challenging one, but do you have any ideas about how that might work?
So it's endophytes. So endophytes are microbes that can live within a plant and as well as outside of a plant. And there's an amazing team of researchers led by Dr. James White at Rutgers University that built upon some existing research into this process of rhizophagy, which is how plants actually uptake microbes and strip them of their nutrients and spew them back out into the soil. So plants aren't vegan, sorry, folks. And as part of that, he also looked into how those endophytes, those microbes that are being sucked into the plant, are actually vectored into the next generation through the seed, and they're held on the seed coat. They're essentially the parent plant kind of chooses what microbes might be useful for its offspring and passes those on in the form of a microbiome on the seed coat. I would advise anyone to look into Dr. James White and his team's research, and also Dr. Mary Lucero, who did some research many years ago on the seed microbiome. It's very, very new science. I mean, it's obviously old knowledge. A lot of Indigenous communities very much knew this and used to prep their seeds using fermented, or they used to make special inoculants up for seeds because they knew that this relationship with the microbes was really important for the health of the plants of the next generation. So there's loads of research out there, and I'd encourage anyone to go and look further into it.
Well, maybe an impromptu question from me and observation. So at the Welsh Permaculture Gathering a few weeks ago, Matt Dunmore gave a talk about biofertilizers, and Jay Abrahams, who does a lot of wetland stuff, and had inoculated 600 walnut nuts with biofertilizers, and they all sprouted. So have you got either of you looking at biofertilizers and how they can be incorporated with seed?
Yeah, I am.
I think it's really super exciting.
I'm actually my friend Jane Arnold runs Oxton Organics in Worcestershire. I'm at her farm at the moment. I work closely with Jane, and she's been working on some biofertilizers, and we've also been inoculating seed for some time, and we've seen some really interesting results. But it's very much farmer science, so it's nothing scientifically robust, but observation is key, and farmer and grower intuition is really important.
Katie, did you want to come in there? It looked like you had no? Okay.
I was pointing at Holly for her enthusiasm, but maybe pointing the wrong way. I was like, she's so enthusiastic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the biofertilizers are really, I mean, I think we should have a session about biofertilizers soon, because they've got massive implications as well, haven't they, in terms of kind of self-reliance and really improving the soil food web, and it all connects very much. Great. Oh, that's exciting. Let's go back to the beginning. We've got a question right from the beginning from Kioma, who says, hi everyone, I'm based in the Midlands and have been a member of Seed Heritage Library, as I believe in seed sovereignty. I would like to breed my own veg long term and sort of locals that are growing as well. So the question I would put along with that is, like, what is the best way for someone to get started? How could How could they connect with what you're doing? If someone wanted to if was inspired by this evening's session, what would their next step be if they were new to this?
Well, I mean, in terms of getting involved in the program, is that what you mean? Or you mean in terms of getting involved
Just
in
with seed saving, I mean, so yes, it could be with your program. Absolutely. Tell us about you do introductory courses?
So we run 3 levels of training. Yeah, we run introductory trainings, and so the way the Seed Sovereignty Programme works is we work really regionally. So we have regional coordinators. Well, I say really regionally, there's one for the whole south of England, one for the whole north of England. So not really regionally, but we try to be as regional as we can. So we run different trainings in different regions: Scotland, Wales, Ireland, south of England, north of England. So you can get involved with you can contact your regional coordinator, who you'll find on the Seed Sovereignty Programme website, and you can look at different trainings that are happening in different areas. So yeah, we sometimes do introductory courses, which are 1 day, and they're often for community growers. And then we also run this year-long seed production training, which is something that you can apply to take part in. And that's for community growers and commercial growers, to really go for a whole year, more into depth into seed production. And we talk about seed sovereignty and seed legislation and a lot of the stuff we've mentioned today, but just in a lot more depth over a whole year. And we try to have cohorts of trainees who meet up with each other in different regions, so you can meet other seed producers in your area. So I would say the training is definitely something, and you can find that on the Seed Sovereignty Programme website. But in terms of getting involved in breeding, I don't know if Holly, do you want to say anything? Where would you start if you wanted to get involved in breeding?
I mean, in terms of breeding, if you're saving seed, you're effectively a plant breeder because you're stewarding that seed. And what we need is more intentional stewardship. We've talked a lot about community and culture and collaboration, and we really need to be creating these new stories around seed to really weave them back into our culture to make them stick. So just the act of saving seed, you're effectively a plant breeder because you're naturally building that relationship with the seed, forming that connection and stewarding it and adapting it to your very local climate. So I always advise people to just start with something they love. Just really start with something that you absolutely love, that you love to eat, you love to grow, and then work out how to save seed from it. And there are so many great resources out there just to teach you beyond the Seed Sovereignty Programme. There's lots of really great books and online content. And yeah, if you're starting with something you love, then you're invested in it and you're starting that relationship. And hopefully from there, you'll get hooked and then you'll look into all these other options. But yeah, if you are saving your own seed and doing it intentionally, then you're effectively plant breeding.
A friend of mine, Tim, has been doing that with maize as opposed to sweet corn. And there is now a really, really well adapted Leeds maize, which is quite a good achievement. And I think that's fantastic. And he shares that out, and I grow some as well. So it's quite exciting.
That's amazing.
So yeah, here's a question from Miriam Johansson. I wonder if you could say a little more about some of the difficulties of saving your own seeds. For example, how do you make sure that the seeds are disease-free, not cross-pollinated, hybridized? Well, how do you make sure they're well pollinated and good quality? So yeah, and I guess she also says for some plants, is it basically just better to leave it to the professionals, like Real Seeds or the Welsh Seed Co-op?
Should we both chip in on this, Katie? Yeah. I was just going to say, obviously starting off with the basics and understanding why you need to, if you're growing open pollinated seed, why isolation is important to keep those varieties stable is always a good place to start. There's some really great introductory books out there, and then all of the crowd breeding and diverse population that I mentioned is where you kind of break the rules. And I always feel like it's really good to have the foundation of intentional and traditional seed keeping practices to then allow you to go to that next level. But a lot of things do cross-pollinate, but a lot of things are also self-pollinating. A lot of our crops have become self-pollinating through our stewardship. And so things like tomatoes and peas and some of the beans will not really easily cross-pollinate. So you can grow those in a fairly close proximity to maybe if you're on allotment and there's lots of people growing things near you. Not runner beans, they cross very easily, but so your French beans and peas and tomatoes, you can really easily probably save seed from those, and that's a really great starting point. And And in terms of disease, it's really just honing your observation and understanding. You know if that plant is healthy. You don't want to save seed from a plant that's got a disease, because some of those diseases will be seed-borne and they will get passed on through the seed. So it's just, really using common sense, and as you would be looking after those plants, probably wouldn't eat the one that has got a disease, then similarly don't save seed from that.
Yeah, yeah. So really focusing on what looks like the best healthy seed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say to the part of that question that was like, should we just leave it to the professionals? And I guess like, yeah, we absolutely should be supporting these small ecological businesses in the UK. Like Real Seeds are amazing, the Wales Seed Hub, Vital Seeds, there's many more, and we should be buying seeds from them and supporting them, absolutely. And we can't all grow all the varieties in our gardens because of issues of cross-pollination and space and all of these kind of things. So yeah, I'm not suggesting everyone should grow all of their seeds. Like it's great to buy some from small ecological producers, but I would say that like the vision for me in the future is that like we go back to having the diversity of seed that we probably had in the past, which is completely really locally and regionally adapted. So it's great that Real Seeds produce seed in Wales and people in Wales can buy that seed, but imagine if like every small locality in Wales had its own varieties that were suited to that microclimate, those soils. So really like everybody needs to be growing seed hay to get back to that kind of real like regionally adapted diverse seed system. And also like I said earlier, growing your own seed, like it really deepens your connection with your crops and with the plants and your understanding of their life cycle. So I wouldn't want to tell anyone to not do that, because you would miss out on that whole beautiful, wonderful learning thing. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Katie. It's really good. I really love Gaia Foundation, and that I think we've got a very, very similar vision of the world, like a world which really is so diverse at the local level, and really, we are producing for each other and really kind of, making each and every place really vibrant and special. So yeah, it's great to hear sort of shared visions.
I just wanted to add just very quickly in terms of like bringing that diversity back. I think I said earlier on in the presentation, you can't save seed from F1 hybrids. I said that by mistake. You actually can. It's just that what you get the next year will be a complete explosion of genetics. And actually some seed might not be viable, but a lot of the times it will be. So if, in answer to the person's question about breeding, if you really want to go deep, then you could always grow out the seed from an F1 hybrid and see what happens, and then you get a really good understanding of what's been going on, years and years in the making of that hybrid as well. So another way of getting an explosion of diversity in genetics.
Yeah, I guess this is where good labeling comes in. That seems to have been a consistent message throughout this series on seed. Okay, let's have a look. So this is quite an interesting one. Emma McKeever says, my PhD is currently in understanding intellectual property and the microbiome. I was wondering, as studies in the microbial world are only just starting, I was wondering if there have been any conversations in the seed sovereignty movement about using the lessons from battling capital culture of seeds to begin to protect and defend microbial sovereignty. Now, I don't know if I read that out very well, but it's like, are there lessons from seed sovereignty battles that could be brought into the whole kind of microbiome style? I mean, effectively, it sounds to me like our microbiomes are going to start to be patented. So,
I mean,
I don't know. I mean, I almost want to bring Emma in and ask her to explain the question.
yeah, that question's blowing my mind. It's a brilliant question.
Emma, can we bring you in? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Would you be willing?
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry, my camera isn't working.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm currently doing a PhD at Queen's. Holly, we met each other like sitting down in the grass at the Land Skills Fair. It's nice to see you again. But basically I'm just trying to intellectual property sort of hasn't got that far yet. But in terms of regenerative agriculture, in terms of like seaweed feed for cattle and the microbiome effects of that is sort of beginning to be subsumed into intellectual property. But they're sort of scrambling to understand how they can do that, and I'm just interested in what sort of lessons from the seed sovereignty movement in sort of like the legal protection for seed sovereignty? Could there be lessons sort of to take forward, if that makes any sense at all?
No, it's great. It's a great question. Thank you for that, Emma. It might be a hard one to answer right now, but maybe I don't know if Holly and Katie want to have a go.
I mean, it's a great question. It is hard to answer. One thing we talk about a lot in the seed sovereignty program is like the kind of spectrum of different kind of ownership around seed, which can go all the way from like seed as the commons that should belong to absolutely everybody, through to like, you know, patenting. But somewhere kind of in the middle there is like yeah, like the rights that plant breeders have, like the rights that people have who have developed varieties and stewarded them maybe for many generations. Maybe, you know, like in the example of the YQ wheat that you mentioned earlier, you know, it took what was it, like 11 years to develop the YQ population wheat. And so like allowing the people who've worked to breed that wheat like have some kind of rights of ownership over that. So with seed, it's really interesting because seed is so connected to human beings and our impact on the seed. Like we are creating the seed, co-creating the seed all the time, that it's kind of hard to see seed as just a completely of its own thing that is just a commons and cannot be owned by anybody, because seed is so linked to the people who bred it and stewarded it. So I guess that's like a difference I'm pointing out, in the sense of like you know, that seed isn't completely kind of a standalone natural thing that we're just trying to own. It's something that we've sort of co-created. That's just a thought off the top of my head. But Holly, I don't know, what do you think?
I mean, I think just to be aware of what's been going on with seed is, as Katie mentioned, there's patenting now, and how far that extends and what restrictions that imposes, and it's kind of working against all of the things we've been talking about basically, and also recognizing what Katie's just said, in that these seeds are in relationship with people, and there is often investment of skill and knowledge and time into creating some of these varieties. So it's a really active and vibrant conversation in the seed community. I think, you know, when I was in the States, there's fantastic initiatives like OSSI, the Open Source Seed Initiative, where they apply this logo to any seed that's been allocated as Open Source Seed Initiative seed, and it means that anyone can take that and breed from it. But it's about recognizing where it's come from. I feel personally it's about the acknowledgement and recognition about the investment that has been put into that seed beforehand, particularly in our kind of the circles that we move in, these kind of communities where people are trying to build this vibrant seed community, and really acknowledging where it's come from, and then where we're going to take it. You know, if it is an Aussie seed, then that's really great, we can do something exciting with a seed. But yeah, it's a complicated topic. I don't know if I make much sense there.
Maybe the thing, Emma, is to maybe raise it with Gaia more generally, or with people like the Earth Law Foundation, or, you know, there'll be people out there. So it's great that you're doing a PhD on it, and yeah, good luck. Okay, I'm going to bring us back down to earth with this question. Over the last couple of growing seasons, I found small round holes in some of my bean seeds in the spring, with tiny grey moths or beetles emerging. I've dealt with this by storing them over winter after drying in small sealed glass jars to check that they're not affected before planting. Is this a common problem? Yeah, raw beans. Yeah,
it's bean weevil, and I think there's two things that cause those holes, and I know I've had experience of bean weevil. Sometimes if they've done a lot of damage, the seed will no longer be viable, but oftentimes they'll have a couple of holes and they'll be fine. But we recommend to get those seeds really, really dry as fast as possible, and then freeze them. And if you freeze them for a short period of time, then that will kill the weevil. So I normally leave mine in the freezer for between like 2 weeks normally.
Okay.
But you have to make sure the seed's very, very dry before you put it in the freezer. And that will get rid of anything that's still living in there, because oftentimes you won't know it's there, and then you'll get your seeds out of wherever you've been storing them to plant them in spring, and they'll just be decimated. So it's good to just check, particularly broad beans, before you put them into storage.
I know a great story I remember from Chris Evans in Nepal, Himalayan Permaculture Network, and they put their seeds on the roof, and then they have a fire underneath, and all the smoke, they have a really intense smoke to go through all the seeds, and that drives all the insects out. So yeah, smoke your seeds, maybe. Okay, on a more practical level, is there a mobile seed cleaning service in the UK?
We would like one, Katie.
We would like one. Yeah, there is a real lack of processing equipment in the UK for seeds, and it's a problem for vegetables. It's even bigger problem for grains. So I've been working with the Llafenni network with the rare oats, and we've had huge problems with how to dehull them, how to process them, how to stabilize them, because there's no oat mills left in Wales. So like lack of machinery is a real problem for us, and it's something that we've been working on a lot in the seed sovereignty program, like looking into recently. And we're looking at we're actually going to be releasing, and we've got some funding from the Creatman Foundation, and we're going to be releasing some funding, like a micropots of funding next year for people to buy small pieces of kit to help the seed movement, so kit that they need to be able to process seeds. And we are looking into models of like sharing machinery collectively. So with the grain work that I mentioned, you know, one of our aspirations with the Llafenni network is to have like a oat processing hub that we share. It would be ideal if it was mobile, but I don't think yeah, that may or may not be possible. But to basically pool our resources and share machinery, and it's like something we're working on, and we hope, yeah, it's in our vision for the future. We need these machines to be able to produce, to be able to grow these seeds and process them and dehull the oats and yeah, share them with other people. Yeah.
It's like a kind of future bioregional infrastructure that we all need, isn't
Yeah.
it? Shared stuff that we'd have in each bioregion.
Yeah, seed hubs in each bioregion with the kit and with the seed banks and with the, and then sharing the seeds, and yeah, beautiful.
Plant nurseries.
The dream.
Yeah.
Yes, this vision is emerging, isn't it? I mean, these things are popping up all across the country, and you know, it's by no means just a dream. There are elements of it all over. It's just bringing it together into places. Okay, so I think this has been answered, but I just want to double check it. When seed saving, is it better to seek to avoid hybridization or encourage it to increase genetic diversity? There are conflicted messages around this issue. So I know we've probably covered it, but
I shouldn't be the person to answer this. I mean, you can do both. Like, if you have a variety that you love, that works really well in your conditions, that is relevant to you, or someone, you know, someone's been doing it for years and they pass it to you, then by like all means keep that variety stable and isolate it. So you want to avoid that crossing with any other varieties of the same species, because you know that variety is great and is working really well and growing really well for you, and maybe, or it's got stories attached to it already and you want to preserve those, and those stable varieties are really, really important. And then also, if you want to experiment, then yeah, have a go at crossing things up and growing a few different varieties of something together that will cross-pollinate and create something new. But just be aware that that will then be a kind of journey that you'll be on, because those genetics will cross, but then they won't really start expressing themselves till maybe 2-3 years in, and you will get an explosion of genetics, and you will really have to intentionally steward that crop and really decide what you want from it. So yeah, it's two different paths, both are really, really important. Depends how deep you want to go.
great. I guess more on this, Simon asks, I understand that there are good reasons not to allow squashes and pumpkins to cross-pollinate.
So
sometimes they're just not viable as the crop.
there is I think it's like this rumor. I always get asked about this. Do you get asked about this, Katie, about this?
Yeah, it comes up every time.
So as far as I'm aware, and I've asked some plant breeders about this, it's only if you allow decorative gourds to cross with squash. And so if a decorative gourd gets in the mix, then something about the decorative gourd makes, I don't know if it's something to do with the chemical, I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I can't answer this fully. Excellent. But I know that decorative gourds are the problematic thing to get in the mix. But allowing, I mean, squash a variety of different species anyway, so your courgettes won't cross with many of your winter squash. So you could grow a courgette and some of the winter squash, and they wouldn't cross anyway because they're a different species. But there are some what we think of as winter squash that are actually the same species as courgette, but they would cross. You'd get something, as I just mentioned, quite diverse in the next year. But as far as I'm aware, I think it's kind of an old wives' tale.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I guess a lot of this is about the kind of investment that you make, isn't it? And if you've only got a small amount of growing space, like you're growing from one allotment, and you know your crops are really important to you, then you kind of want to have a more surefire bet on, you know, more guaranteed kind of outcome. If you've got more space, maybe you can experiment more. Yeah. How do alternative seed companies like Vital Seeds sell their seeds, considering the current restrictive legislation? Can we, so I guess, can they only sell homogeneous varieties? I mean, I guess the answer is just simply yes. They can only.
Well, yeah. So technically, so to sell seed in the UK, you have to be registered as a seed seller, and that's okay. That's fine to do that. The Wales Seed Hub have done that. We're registered as a seed seller. We have a seed inspection every year, and it's basically about record keeping. It's to show that you've got traceability of where all of your crops have been and that they are what you say they are, and that's fine. There's the part about the legislation which is about varieties, which you probably all will know about, which is that varieties technically legally to be sold have to be on the national list, and so that a variety has to be distinct, uniform and stable to get on the national list, and it's only legal to sell if it's on the national list. But there's two ways that we get around this in the Wales Seed Hub. I can't really speak to Vital Seeds what they do, but in the Wales Seed Hub we sell seeds. We have a seed inspection every year. One thing is the amateur variety listing. So you can list a vegetable variety as an amateur variety, which costs a lot less than the distinct, uniform and stable listing. It's like £150, and then you can sell it in small packets legally. So we've done that with a couple of varieties that we got from the Heritage Seed Library. We listed them as amateur varieties and they were legal to sell. Then the other thing to say is that AFA, who inspect us, they don't actually enforce this legislation around variety listings. So when they inspect us, they see that we are selling varieties which are not on the national list, and they don't enforce that part of the legislation. That's not to say that they won't in the future, and it's not to say that the legislation shouldn't change to be more suited to allowing more people to do this legally, but at the moment they're not enforcing that. So we do sell varieties in the Wales Seed Hub, and so do all the other small seed companies which are not on the national list, and there's been no consequences of that. It is harsher in the grain world. So like it seems that the AFA are not that concerned with like small packets of vegetable seeds being sold, but what we hear from people working in the grain space is it's a different thing, because they're selling on a much bigger scale, and it's a lot more prohibitive to them because there is more consequences if they sell grains on a large scale which are not listed as distinct, uniform and stable. But I wouldn't let the legislation put you off from sharing or selling seeds, because at the moment we don't know of anybody in the UK who's had any negative consequences of not fully being in line with that legislation. Yeah.
Okay. I always feel like I need to give some sort of legal disclaimer for this session, but I'm sure it'll be fine. I think this is probably our last question. So from Jenny Reddy, just wondering if you have any opinion on the doomsday seed vault. It seems to me like it's more about saving varieties that will feed us after doomsday, rather than to save heirloom varieties and varieties that are going extinct. But just wondering what you think about it, or if you have some other info. So I guess in a way it's maybe that debate, you know, are seeds best off in a vault that minus 40 degrees C, or are they best off in the field, or do we need both?
Holly, do you want to start?
I mean, I I'm just speaking for myself, and my personal opinion on this is I do think we need both. I think it's really important, and often those seed vaults that you're talking about are not just holding food crops, they're holding a diversity of all botanical crops. Yeah. So I think they're definitely valid and they're important. But seed is alive, like seed is a living, dynamic thing, and as we've talked about a lot already, is it's in relationship with the humans that are stewarding it. And if we put it into a freezer and forget about it for 50 years, then it's going to come out of that freezer and be quite shocked when it grows in whatever we then plant it into, because it's not been building those relationships with all the other living communities around it, and it's not been able to adapt and evolve to what's been emerging over that 50 years. So yeah, my opinion is that if you have a seed library, then having them as living seed libraries and having seed stewards and keeping those active and growing them out every few years, so that those seeds have a memory and a recognition of what's going on in their environment very recently, then personally I think that's really, really important. And I try to avoid keeping seeds like for too long in without actually growing them out. But I do also think that, you know, it's very important to have these kind of long-term storage of seed as well.
Great, thanks, Holly. Katie?
Yeah, well, just to add to that, I mean, Holly said it really well, and I agree with you, Holly, is that in some of the work we've done with the Seed Sovereignty Programme, we have had to go to seed banks to get hold of seeds which are almost extinct. And if I hadn't been able to go to that seed bank and request that seed, we wouldn't have it. And as in the case of the oats, you know, we've received a lot of rare Welsh oats from gene banks in the UK. And there's quite a lot of gene banks in the UK. They're often attached to academic institutions. So we have a really nice partnership in Wales with the IBERS Plant Breeding Centre. And a lot of what they do in IBERS is not necessarily in line with what we do in the Seed Sovereignty Programme. But we have a nice partnership with them where they, you know, they have shared seeds from their seed banks with us to do what we're doing. And if they hadn't stored and collected and kept those seeds, we wouldn't have them at all. But of course, the problem is we get them back in tiny quantities. So, you know, we get like sort of 20 seeds of a cadfloid oat, which is an old Welsh grey oat, and we have to then grow it for like years and years and years to increase the quantities. So it's not enough. And like Holly said, it's not seed that's been grown out and alive and adapting and connected to people. But thank God it was there in the first place for us to get. And I would encourage you all to like, build relationships actually with seed banks and gene banks and take seeds out of them and grow them.
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe I'm going to try and get in the last question, Ben, which is around, you know, we've lost like 75% of our agricultural biodiversity. So, I mean, how much of that is completely lost, and how much of that is just it's not commercially viable, not commercially grown, and is any of that recoverable? I mean, is that something that we could be actively taking part in rebuilding, or is it just gone? Do you know?
I think we don't know the extent of what's lost. I'm going to give the oat example again, just because it shows, like, it's just a good example, is like working with older Welsh farmers and talking about anecdotally like old Welsh varieties and then being like, where are they? I looked in one gene bank and there was 104 Welsh oat varieties in that gene bank. So, you know, that's what was there. That's what was recorded in that gene bank. But what didn't make it to the gene bank, we really don't know. It's kind of oral history, anecdotal, you know, it's in a few people's old farm records. We don't know how much we lost that didn't make it to the gene bank.
Okay.
And we can't restore what we've lost, but we can create new diversity, which is part of the intention of these diverse populations and participatory breeding projects, is that like really inspiring that return and collaborative participation around bringing that diversity back, getting people creating new varieties and getting inspired to get engaged with plant breeding again, and rebuilding diversity from the bottom up.
Which is where, you know, to go back to one of your slides around the kind of impact of the Seed Sovereignty Programme, you've got new varieties are out there as a result of this work. You know, and that's fantastic. And, you know, maybe this is a good place to bring in everyone that's on the call. You know, there's 45 people have been on this call, and every one of us can like do something that contributes to a more diverse, biodiverse future. So, you know, we really all can make a difference. Okay, I'm going to say a huge thank you to Holly and Katie for being here. I also want to thank Gaia Foundation for existing. It's fantastic, you know, that all these different organisations can work together. One of the purposes of these campfire events is to try and help showcase other networks and how we kind of all work together for a kind of common future, for you know, a healthy and sustainable future together. So thank you both, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to pass back to Hannah now. She's got a few things to do before we finish.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Holly and Katie. Oh, that was so amazing. I've been to quite a few sessions now by the Gaia Foundation. I did the year-long training, and just every time I learned something new. So thank you so much for agreeing to come and do this today. Just to say sorry everyone for the technical issues I was having. I don't know how often you probably heard it saying it was starting and stopping recording. Hopefully the recording will be okay, but you might just need to bear with us. I think Andy's done a bit of recording as well, and we'll try and get that out to you as soon as possible, depending on how that's gone with my slightly dodgy internet connection. So yeah, just a big thank you to everyone for coming this evening for the session. It's great to see so many people here. And just a little reminder before you go, that we'll send the details round of our upcoming events. It would be great to see even more people at those. And also, please, if you could complete the feedback form, we'd really appreciate it. It will help us to work out what we want to do next year in terms of these campfire sessions, and make sure it's something that is really valuable to the people who want to come along and attend them. So that would be great. I've put the link in the chat, but I'll also circulate all of the information after this session as well. So yeah, thank you everyone, and yeah, good night.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks,
See you, everyone.
Katie. Thanks, Holly. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.